In this video, I'll be teaching you everything you need to know about this new deck that just ended up coming in and sweeping all the tournaments, which of course is Wilista. So Wilista, of course, is a deck that has existed from before, but with the kind of support that it got in Festival Booster, it's basically a whole new deck of its own. And so today we will be presenting you with a primer in order to give you a look over the entire deck list itself, and of course also take a look at all the different combos that you can do with the deck, the things you should know about it, the various interactions and things to keep in mind. It's basically the usual deck profile style that you're used to, but I actually realized that the word primer kind of fits a bit better for these. So hope you enjoy. And I've actually been using this deck quite a lot in tournaments recently myself as well, so that's why I feel pretty confident in going over it and telling you everything you need to know. So starting off, of course, this is Wilista, drawn by the beautiful Fuzzy Choco. So they're an artist that drew the Gabriel series as well back in G-Era. And so in terms of ride line, we of course are running the Wilista ride line. You don't have to run the Wilista grade 0, but I choose to still run it just to be consistent. And then we have the Wilista grade 1. The Wilista grade 1 says that when you ride over her, you can put one card from your hand into your soul in order to search your deck for a gem card and then add it to your hand after revealing it and then shuffle your deck. And on the rearguard circle, we're not going to really go over this. It's Soul Blast 1 you play in order to get plus 5k, but you never have her on the rearguard circle. There's no actual way to put it on the rearguard circle because she's only in the ride deck. We'll go over what these gem cards are in a moment. And then of course we have the grade 2 Wilista, who says when you play a gem card, you draw one once per turn. So she draws you a card on top of the card draw that the gem already gives you. In the Guardian Circle, for every 2 gem cards in your drop, she gets plus 5k shield, which again, we won't really be using that ability because we never play her on the Guardian Circle. And finally, the actual new card that basically saved the deck. So the Festi Magica Wilista. So she has several effects. First, she has the dress up ability, which says that she is always regarded during a fight as the same name as the original Wilista. So any cards that would need the original Wilista on your Vanguard Circle will also be satisfied by having her on the Vanguard Circle too. And when she's placed on the Vanguard Circle, you can discard one in order to choose a gem card from either your soul or drop and add it back to your hand. So this is one of the only cards in the entire game right now that actually has an on-ride discard ability, which means that we can use the cycle cards that work off being discarded in the ride phase in order to draw a card in this deck as well. And then by soul blasting a gem card, you can do the following depending on which one you soul blasted, but the only gem card we play is the one that combines both. So you'll always be using both effects. The first effect is to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and call up to 2 unit cards from among them to rearguard circles and then shuffle your deck. The second one is for this turn she gets plus 15k power, which works on even when you're going first, by the way. So your opponent is dealing with a minimum 28k Vanguard, oftentimes 33 or even 41. So really strong. This ride line is just very cohesive and allows us to draw extra cards, as well as of course just supplying with what the Vanguard wants to be. And of course, in order to persona ride consistently, we are running 3 extra copies of the Wilista in order to be able to persona ride at all times. So that is, pretty self-explanatory. But then we go over our only grade 3 supporting card, which of course is the Ophelia. So she's been around already since the second lyrical set, and so she has a couple effects. Her first effect is, or I mean, it's technically one effect that's combined into, splits into 2, I suppose, but she says that when your Wilista Vanguard finishes attacking, so at the end of the battle, if this turn you have played or soul blasted by your Vanguard's ability a gem card, you do the following depending on which one it is. So because we play a gem card that combines both of these into one, we do both. So she gets plus 15k power, so she doesn't need to do anything else to get the plus 15k power, just at the end of the battle that your Vanguard attacked if you played or soul blasted one of the gems this turn, or the gem rather. And then the other effect is you can count almost 1 and return the rearguard behind your Vanguard to your deck in order to stand her. So this is a restanding rearguard. Unfortunately, only one of them can restand if you have 2 of them lined up, because she has to return the unit behind your Vanguard, so that means you only have 1 usually. But by doing that, she's 28k and she multi-attacks, and this deck is capable of going for the full 5 attacks in 1 turn. So she's just one of them, right? She's the one that enables the 4th attack, but I'll show you how we enable the 4th as well. Now, I talked about it earlier, but you are able to discard in the ride phase in this deck, so we're running 3 copies of Valsbraun. So this is the cycle card for Lyrical Monasterio, and it's a pretty good one. When discarded from hand during your ride phase, you can soul blast 1 and bot deck it to draw 1 card, which is really good. And the second effect is when placed on rearguard circle, if you're persona riding this turn, you can count almost 1 and give your Vanguard the ability that for that turn it gains the red text continuous effect that all of your front row units get plus 5k. So even if she's not on the board anymore after that, she will still apply that plus 5k to your front row, which means that those numbers are going to hit pretty hard because the Vanguard's already hitting like a truck, and of course Ophelia is also like a 28k solo attacker without persona ride or boost. So yeah, these numbers are going to get added up pretty quickly, but we mostly run her for that discard effect, and we only run 3 copies because there is another card in this deck that wants to kind of conflicts for the soul, right? We do soul blast 1 for this, we soul blast 1 for the gem gem for Wilista all the time, and we have another card in this deck that's Soul Blast as well that we'll talk about in a bit. And then we have another grade 2, which is the Ramona. So Ramona is actually a set 1 lyrical card who says if you've played both of the gems, so of course we play an order that combines both into one, she gets plus 10k. So you might be thinking, what, just plus 10k, that's nothing that much. But when you think about it, turn 2, your Vanguard is swinging for 15, I'll explain why in a second, and this on the side is 20 minimum. That's pretty hard for your opponent to guard if you start pushing them with such aggression all of a sudden. Again, this is a card that you can also choose to run at 4 if you really want to push the aggro with this deck, but honestly the space in this deck is pretty tight, and I'm running a relatively, I think now it's a relatively well-known one of, but at the time of building this back in the release in Japan, it wasn't that well known. But Ramona is a really strong card just because she's a solo 20k. On Persona she's 30, with a boost she's 38, so it only gets better. And I've been alluding to it this whole time, but this is of course the gem that makes this deck work so well. I remember still when the deck was revealed and we initially saw the new Wilista, I was like, okay, this is pretty good, but you know, you still have to play both gems, that seems kind of mid. But then they revealed this card and that's when everything changed. So Crossing Illumerays is the order name, and it says, during the fight, this is regarded as both of the blue and the red gem. So you can see that she's holding onto both of them. And so when you play it, or when let's say your Vanguard needs to Soul Blast the gems, if you Soul Blast this, it's regarded as both. So just, it's a 1 for 2. It's like, you know, those like buy one get one free deals you get at the supermarket. That's what this is. But the actual effect is you can only play this if you have a Wilista Vanguard, and when you play it, you put it to the soul, you draw 1, and you give your Vanguard plus 5k for the turn. And if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, then you give your Vanguard the red text effect, which says when this unit attacks, you can counterblast 1 and Soul Blast a grade 3 Wilista in order to choose a rearguard and stand it. And of course, it also says that after you play this, you cannot play any more orders this turn. So of course, there's no way to cheat out 2 of these because it's so strong, right? It goes to soul, so you don't actually lose anything from playing it. You draw cards, so you gain something from playing it. It triggers any effects when your gems are played or etc. And it gives the plus 5k and the extra attack. The plus 5k is actually more important than you think because having a 15k grade 2 on turn 2 means you don't have to commit any boosters behind your Vanguard in order to make your opponent not 1 card guard. And also if you bloat on these orders and you draw too many in the early game, you can even play it on turn 1 going second to have a 13k, and then when you aggro your opponent with an 8k on the rear and then a 13k on the van, it can be pretty annoying as well. So honestly, this is like the MVP of the deck in my opinion. This is the card that made the deck really good, and hence why it's also in the thumbnail rather than the grade 3 Wilista herself. Up next we get into the grade 1s, and this is the other card that I talked about which conflicts on the soul, and of course it is Yuika. So this was the thing that kind of was stopping me from buying the deck, but luckily I pulled one from one of my festival booster boxes, and then based Kai from WCC sold me his remaining 3 for a nice price, and so therefore I was able to play this whole deck. So Yuika says, when another unit is placed in the same column as her, if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, she gets plus 5k power. This actually kind of matters because this turns things from 28k to 33k, which can be sometimes pretty awkward for your opponent to guard if they're not playing specific triggers. But of course, the most important part of why she's good and why she's so expensive is that second effect. When she boosts a rearguard at the end of that battle, you can Soul Blast 1 and you choose the boosted rearguard and bounce it back to hand. This means a lot of things. This means you can bounce virtually anything you call from Willista's effect. I'll give some examples later, but you can bounce PGs that you call from the top 5, you can bounce your Persona that you call from the top 5, you can bounce the Cycler, right, that you can discard next turn after your Persona right again. So it's just all you can do and all you can eat basically with Yuika out here. And the crazy part is that you can push in the early game and then get your attackers back so they don't get damage denied later down the line, and you don't actually lose your attackers too. The only thing is you have to really manage your soul. That's why some people play Trixie, who is a grade 2 that is also in Festival Booster that generates soul, but I chose not to, and instead I really want to focus on the aggro that this deck can output together with Yuika, together with Ramona, and a lot of the other cards that of course scale after turn 3. So Yuika, you can play 3 and then put Welsh Brown to 4, but if you're really going for that aggro play, I think that Yuika at 4 is really good. Like I've tested 3, I've tested 4, I find 4 to be really good. The other card that you kind of have to play at 4 is the Elvira. So Elvira is the other grade 1 from the first lyrical set that's kind of stuck around, and her effect is really good right now. So when you play the gem, if your Vanguard is the grade 3 Wilista, you draw 1. So that means if let's say you have 3 of them on the board and you play the grade 1 gem that, you know, we play in this deck, that means you draw 4 total cards. 4 cards for 1. That's pretty good. That is usually what makes the difference, right? It's like just having these out and like using Wilista Soul Blast 1 to top 5, call 2 of these and then play your gem again and put that to soul and draw 3 is like, it's really good. It's really good. It gives you the guard value, it gives you Persona Ride finding, it finds you PGs, all that kind of stuff. It's just amazing. So she has to be played at 4. I tried 3 initially, but I was like, no, this gets cleared out against like Gandiva and stuff, and you just want to have it on the board. So please make sure that you're playing it because it's a really, really good card, and I think you really do want to have it at 4. Perfect cards are pretty straightforward. I'm running 3 PGs and 1 of the Elementaria Sanctitude, just because you still don't want to get gotcha'd by weird matchups. Stride decks still exist, next stage is still going to be around, and of course you still are going to run into some Messiahs here and there too. You don't have an insane matchup against Messiah, although you can aggro them pretty well, which gives you a pretty good edge in that matchup. So I think that having the 3-1 split is pretty good, but if you don't have this or can't afford it, you can run the 4 PGs and there's no actual problem with that either. And if anything, that means that you have more chance to call PGs off of Wilista to bounce them back to your hand if you ever need them. And then my kind of like spicy one of that, I don't know if it's that spicy anymore, is the one Odysseus. So Odysseus says, when placed on rearguard circle, you choose one of your other units and give it plus 10k for the turn. But in exchange, she only has 3k power. But as I mentioned earlier, the Vanguard is usually like 33k minimum, 43k on Persona Ride. Putting a 3k behind a 33, 43 isn't going to make a huge difference for your opponent's guarding. Your Vanguard's probably going to get PG'd or no guarded anyway. So putting this on an Ophelia is huge because Ophelia is actually very weak on her first attack. She's only 13k, so she needs to be boosted to make 21. With this, that makes 31. And on top of that, when she restands and gains the plus 15k, she'll be 38 now without Persona Ride, or 48 with Persona Ride, which is incredible. So Odysseus, even as a 1-of, is really nice because you don't really want to see her early. If you do, you can pair her up with a Yuika and then have like a 21k Yuika column, and the Yuika bounces her back to hand as well. But seeing her in the later game and just you keep putting her behind Vanguard and returning her to your deck with Ophelia's ability means that you will continuously have this plus 10k power buff, which is basically an extra trigger that you check this turn, right? It's so good. So I like the 1-of Odysseus. A lot of people don't play this, but I think that it's honestly a really good 1-of to have. And you look through the deck quite a lot, and that's why if you're an Eva player, I recommend playing this deck, because that's why I got really into the deck, is because you look through the deck so much that actually it feels a bit Eva-like. And then we have, of course, the overtrigger. So the overtrigger for this deck is the Irosfaro, so the blue OT. So this one, of course, says this bonus effect is to choose a card from drop, add it back to hand, and choose a unit and give it plus 1 crit. So it lets you recover your Persona Rides, lets you recover your gems if you're out of them, lets you recover your PGs if you need them. You know, if you discard one of your big triggers, of course, you can get them back as well. If you check this early, it can be a little bit because usually you don't really have that many good targets in the drop. But the plus 1 crit is also really nice because, you know, you're a 5-attack deck and putting an extra crit on one of those 5 attacks is really good. And of course, if your opponent 2 passes and you check this, then you also hit with an extra damage, which the deck doesn't necessarily have. So sometimes, like if your opponent no guards the Vanguard and goes like, okay, if you check like the lyrical OT, I can check a defensive OT and then I'll survive. But with this, you kind of turn it into a 2 damage ping, and it's just an extra critical trigger in your deck. So I honestly think the blue OT is really, really good, and it's really good in a lot of decks right now too. And then, as you probably already alluded, I'm running 8 total criticals. So 4 of the vanilla ones. These are just the Bang Dream ones, but you know, you can make it to whatever your lyrical trigger you want to do. And then I do run 4 of the soul crits. Now, this isn't mandatory. The reason why is because I'm a little bit greedy with my soul. I like to really maximize on my Yuikas, on my Welsh Browns, and just get as much of the card advantage that I can. So sometimes there are instances where if, let's say, I really need the soul, I will actually call this out. And you can make some nice columns with it. So for example, if you have a Ophelia with an 8k, that's only 21. But if you put this behind one of your, let's say, Ramonas to make like a 24, you can then put it to soul to give the plus 2k to your Ophelia, and then you'll make a 23k column, so suddenly you're hitting magic numbers. So there are some small applications to the effect crits in this deck, so I think it is worth running them, but it really depends on how you build your deck lineup in general. And then I'm running 3 fronts. A lot of people do run 3 draws here as well, just especially for the mirror matches and whatnot, but I'm kind of afraid of decking out. This deck is definitely prone to it, and I feel like checking a front on when you're going for the 5-attack combo is just super strong, and the 20k shield is good too. Although it doesn't help that this deck's like hardest turn is usually turn 2, where you have to discard a card for right deck and then put a card from hand to soul for the right deck as well, and that's where you like putting a draw doesn't hurt, but putting a front into your soul, that's where it kind of feels painful. And then my heal lineup is actually not super conventional, but that's mostly because of the way that the JP meta is right now. So I'm running 2 of the regular heal triggers, and then I'm running 2 of the effect heals, which say that when your opponent's unit has attacked twice or more this turn, gets plus 20k shield. Reason why is because Minerva's super common right now, and Minerva of course is a restanding Vanguard, and this can sometimes be, you know, just the only card you need to guard with against Minerva second attack, depending on how your triggers are that game, you know, between you and your opponent. It's also good in the mirror match because you stop your opposing Ophelias as well. You know, this is makes it easier to guard in general. And there's gonna be more and more decks that pop up that have restanding rears or restanding vanguards, so I feel like this heal's pretty good. You can run 4 of the vanilla one if you want to, but I think a 2-2 split is pretty good and doesn't really get punished too much. And if anything, this has actually saved me against Minerva quite a bit, so especially going into the DBT 11 meta, I do recommend it quite a lot. Alright, so that is it for the deck list. Now let's take a look at some examples of combos and other interactions you should know about. Alright, this is kind of one of your optimal kind of board setups for the 5 multi-attack. Of course, these also be Yuikas, but assuming they use Elvira to draw cards and you've like played your gem and soul blasted your gem to call cards and whatnot and found any Rishas, this is sort of like some of the bigger push you can do. So Rishas' effect obviously would have gone on most likely your Ophelia just to kind of make her attack for bigger numbers. So generally speaking here, the attack pattern is swinging with the unboosted Ramona here. So she would be 20k, or I guess we would have persona ridden by now, so it would be 30k. Then here you're swinging for 33, and then you can also apply the boost to make that into 41 because she's going to get so much power that the boost kind of doesn't matter as much. And then when the Wilista swings, of course, she is 43k with the persona, 46 with the boost, and then you'll be able to use the orders effect here in order to soul blast your Wilista and pay a counterblast 1 in order to stand one of your rear guards. And then at the end of the battle, after you have done your drive checks, you'll be able to use this effect to counterblast 1 and return the Vanguard booster to your deck in order to stand the Ophelia. And now you have 2 more attacks still, so this will of course be 30 with any triggers that you applied to it if you did, and 38 with a boost. And then this one is of course now 33 from the persona as well as the Rushas, and now 48 with the self effect applying the plus 15k as well. Now I mentioned this already earlier, but Yuika really does have a lot of really good applications in this deck where she essentially allows you to, whatever you find off of Wilista Soul Blast to call 2 cards off of, you can bounce a lot of different targets. So keep in mind that PGs are normal units that you can call, and if you need a perfect guard, you can indeed call it and then boost with Yuika to Soul Blast 1 and bounce it back to hand. Alternatively, if you don't have cycle cards, you can also call them out as well, and then after boosting with Yuika, you'll be able to Soul Blast 1 and get them back to hand too. Same applies for Persona Rides, that if you need them for next turn, then once again, you Soul Blast 1 after boosting and get that to hand. And even if not, don't forget that as long as your opponent's Vanguard's on grade 3, if you call something in front of her, she gets the plus 5k, so that's already going to push for good numbers. So while this normally would have been 21, the 26 does help to push slightly higher, and you don't have to use the Soul Blast 1 to bounce, so you can just kind of keep her there and then stand the Ophelia by her own effect later down the line too. Alright, now as always, I think a lot of things can be learned pretty well from just watching a mulligan be played out. So we're going to do the usual, just kind of play out a mulligan and show you how things are played. So kind of give you some of the thoughts that you should kind of take into mind when going through the motions for this deck. This opening hand is honestly pretty tragic. This is not what you want to be seeing at all. Ramona is good for the early game, but we kind of need Yuika to accompany her in order to be any good. So I would even say that you're going to toss 5 here. You want to see things like Yuika, Persona Rides. Ophelia is okay in the early game, not necessarily a big want, but this is much better. So here we can actually play the game, so it's a lot stronger. So let's shuffle our deck and get into it. All right, deck has been shuffled, so let's go. Let's say we go first here, so I'm going to draw a card, and then we're going to be able to, we have quite a lot of plays to make here. We can ditch the Welsh Brown here in order to be able to draw cards. So we're going to ride and then Soul Blast 1 from the Welsh Brown in order to put the Welsh Brown herself to the bottom of the deck and then draw a card from the top. And that's all the Wilista can really do on turn 1. If you go second, if you open too many of the orders, you can play them out and then start drawing cards immediately. But here otherwise we're going to just take 1 damage. It's going to be Yuika, which kind of hurts but not the end of the world, and then draw a card for the turn, and we get a PG, which is also very nice. And this is usually where the turns get a little bit hard, because here we're going to have to discard 1 card and also put another card into the soul. So Ophelia we can find off the top 5 later down the line. So let's ditch her for the ride deck, and then we're going to ride into the grade 2 Wilista, and now we need to put another card from hand into the soul. We need the double gem because we need to have 1 gem in the soul and then you need to have 1 gem in the hand in constant rotation. So you need to keep a gem in hand for the grade 3 turn, and then you want to have 1 in the soul from playing it on turn 2. We need Yuika in case we find off the 2 draw from playing the gem here, anything that we can aggress with. So let's put the crit into the soul here just to build up ourselves a soul, and then we search our deck for the gem card. So of course you're always going to be just searching for the actual grade 1 gem that we play. There's nothing else that we can target, so I'm going to add that to hand and then shuffle our deck. Alright, deck's been shuffled. So now of course we just want to immediately play this card in order to see what we're going to draw, because we draw 1 card from the gem itself and then 1 card from the Wilista effect. So draw 1 into another gem, draw 2 into a Ramona, so perfect. Now we can actually play out the Yuika and call out the Ramona, and now we have a very strong offensive because this Vanguard circle is only 15k, but that's really awkward to guard for your opponent because of the way that, you know, they would drop a 15k to make it no pass, you know, if this was 10k, but because 15, a 15k is still 1 to pass. So if they go for 15 and we check a trigger, then it's kind of, you know, bad news for them, but we don't. But this is still going to be swinging for 28. Keep in mind, Yuka does not gain the plus 5k if your opponent is not a grade 3. And so we're going to use the Yuka's effect here in order to Soul Blast the trigger that we just put into Soul earlier and bounce this to hand. Not so much because we need to use Ramona later, but more so because we don't want to get damage denied for future turns. And we want to reuse the attackers without having to lose them from our opponent swinging into them too. Next turn, let's say we take an attack. It's another Ramona, a bit unfortunate. And since they are going second, let's just say we drop a 15k to guard their second attack, and then we're going to get our turn again. And this is where things really start revving up for Wilista. So we have a bit too many gems in hand. Obviously, if we would have had this many in the early turns, I would have just kind of played one in the early turn. But we're going to ditch one here and ride into Wilista. And we don't need to get back the gem because you only ever need one gem in hand. So even having these two is honestly kind of wasteful. But before we play the gem, what's really important is that you Soul Blast the gem for Willista's effect first in order to look at top 5 and try to call up to 2. And this is actually looking like a pretty good top 5 because we can call the Ophelia here to make our 4th attack. And then we can call the Wilista here in order to have our Persona ride for next turn, and then the rest does get shuffled back. So you can see how we're basically, you know, using the Soul Blast first in order to look for Elvira's. And even if we didn't get any, I mean, now we can just play the gem and put it to Soul. And I mean, if we draw an Elvira, we can use it for next turn. And there we go. Of course we did, right? There's still 4 in the deck, so we're bound to draw them. You can choose to play her either behind Rearguard or Vanguard here, depending on what you want to do for the rest of the turn, because you will need her behind Vanguard in order to, or you need a Rearguard behind Vanguard to use Ophelia here. And I don't really want to call anything else out of this hand because we didn't draw Elvira, so we don't actually have a big hand. So we're just going to go into battle. So there's only going to swing for 13. As I said, it's a really small attack on the first swing. And then don't forget that this attack will not be restanding yet because our opponent is not a grade 3, so the order will not restand our rears. So this will swing for 33 due to Wilista's and the order's power combined. So 41 with a boost. We do a twin drive, we get a heal. We haven't been checking crits, so let's say the heal is effective. We can give that power up. So there's only 21, so we can actually give it here as we're against the grade 2 Vanguard, and then get another Ophelia that's going to go to hand. And then we use the Ophelia herself to CB1 and put back the Elvira that we can now shuffle the deck for, try to find them off of the gem orders later down the line, and then she stands for an extra attack. So this will be 28, and then we will also be able to swing with this, which is 23 plus 8, so 31. And then of course we can use Yuika here in order to Soul Blast 1 and get back this Wilista to hand for a potential Persona ride next turn. Even though we already have one, we're just kind of, you know, it's good to have the Persona rides, and there was nothing better to add there anyway. So let's say next turn we're going to get pushed quite a bit in damage. We check a front, so that's a good first check. But let's say we got crits, we have to check 2 triggers. We don't check a second one, so it's okay. Or let's say you guard with a 30k against 1 attack, and then if they're coming in with like huge pressure, we might have to PG this. You can choose to discard the order, because then if you top deck, let's say the Welsh Brown, you can just discard it in order to draw a card after that, and also, you know, while getting back the other thing. We only need 2 CB per turn, so do keep that in mind when you're playing the deck, that you want to be proceeding with 2 CB a turn. Wow, we actually draw the Welsh Brown, that's crazy. So we're going to Persona Ride here. Persona Ride is going to proc and we draw a card first, and then we can use Wilista's effect to discard a card. You have to finish processing this effect first, so discard 1, get it back, and then you can process the Welsh Brown in order to choose a card from your soul. Make sure you don't Soul Blast this or this, so you only have one more choice. We're going to Soul Blast the non-grade 3 Wilista and non-or gem in order to put this back and draw a card. So we draw into another crit, but it's 15k shield, so it's not the end of the world. And first, again, you want to use the gem from Wilista in order to look at top 5 and try to find some Elvira. So we're going to see what we find. Oh, this is actually pretty good. So we find a Yuika. Unfortunately, she won't get plus 5k because there's already a Rearguard here. But as you can see, we find ourselves the Ruchus, who can now give the plus 10k to this Ophelia, and now the rest will get shuffled back into the deck. And then this way, we have a really strong offensive. We might be liking some rears, but we can make something happen here. So you're going to be pretty low on hand here if you don't start plussing from the Elvira, but keep in mind that if you call this Elvira and then draw 2 and then overcall the Elvira, you're making the same amount of hand advantage anyway. So I think here it's fine to just kind of accept that this is not the turn for Elvira, and we're going to just kind of focus on the offense. So draw just 1 card here, and that's okay. We get some PG fodder for later. And I would say you actually want to call 2 Ophelias here. So while both Ophelias won't proc their stand effects, the plus 15s will proc even if you don't stand them. So I'll show you what I mean. This Yuika will get the plus 5 as well. So this one is the smaller one. This is 23k on her own, plus the 8, so 31, 36 with the extra power. Then we'll swing with this one. So this one is coming in with 23 from Persona, 33 from the Ruchus, and then it's going to be an 8, so 41. And then when the Wilista swings, we're going to be able to use the Orders effect first to counterblast 1, and of course Soul Blast the Wilista herself. And then we stand this one by Wilista Orders effect And then we do our drive checks, of course. We check OT, that's pretty good, but let's pretend that's not there, you know, just to kind of process this. I feel like adding the OT is going to make things more complicated. And then at the end of the battle, these both proc. So this one is already standing, so she's going to just get the plus 15k, but the other one is going to allow us to put back the Russius and, of course, stand herself. And now both of them have the plus 15, so this is really huge. You have to always keep in mind that Ophelia does get the plus 15 even if you don't stand her. So this way, this one is coming in with the 23, 38, and of course, a bit smaller. And this one was 33 to begin with, so now it's 48. So that's really huge. And you basically just rinse and repeat. And then, of course, you want to open Elvira's on your turn 3 turn in order to be able to draw a bunch of cards and have like a huge hand. But sometimes you also have hands like this where you're basically just going full on offense using Yuika to push the aggression. You don't always have to use her Soul Blast to get the cards back to hand as well, so do keep that in mind. But that's just an example of kind of how Wilista wants to use her turns. Alright, so this has been Wilista. Before we wrap up, I also wanted to kind of go over some of the matchups that you might want to keep in mind. Eva kind of begins to fall off in this meta a little bit, and partially is because this has a really good matchup into Eva. So in set 11, I feel like Eva finally starts to kind of come back a little bit because it gets a bit more stamina, but this deck has the early game that really makes Eva cry because of how strong it is and kind of rips out a lot of the key pieces from Eva's hand before she gets to set up. It pops off on turn 3, which Eva cannot really deal with decks like that very well either, so it's really, really strong and a good matchup for you as well if you're playing into Eva. Diva is pretty close. I think it is slightly Gandiva favor just because if they really are a smart Gandiva player and they take out your Elviras above all else, you will run out of your draw engine, which is pretty huge. Jet is also relatively equal, but I do think that overall it really depends on the Jet build. If they run Crucial Dragon, they have 2 ways to remove units from your board per turn, which means that your Elviras are going to get bot decked and also retired. So if they run it, you're gonna have a tougher matchup. If not, if they're just putting 1 Elvira back per turn, you're kind of okay because your draw engine is not getting shut down as easily. Against things like Minerva coming up, I think it's also relatively equal. Minerva is very fast, but you're also a deck that has a pretty good early game and you can stabilize in the mid game and then kind of scale out for later turns. It does feel kind of going first favored though, so there it really comes down to the dice roll, I think, in that matchup if both players are equally skilled. Overlord, I think this deck definitely has a strong matchup against just because you get to push them and, you know, while they have to wait till turn 3 to really set up, their attackers are kind of restricted. You know, they do have the Burning Horn, but that's about it. Hexorb, it really depends. Like if Hexorb really like draws the nuts, it can be pretty crazy, but you have the ability to search out your PGs and bounce them with Yuika, which I think is really strong, and that kind of gives you an edge in that Hexorb matchup too. And I think that's kind of some of the main big decks that you expect to see with Wilista. And of course, the mirror match really comes down to, you know, both the builds, but also how well you're able to balance the early to mid game, because I think that's where really things are determined with this deck. If you have a strong early game and you can really push your opponent, you can usually close out games by turn 4 even. But if it's a little bit slower, if you start not finding your pieces, or if your top 5 with Wilista is really bad, like, you know, like 1 PG, 4 triggers or something, then obviously you're gonna have some trouble. But generally speaking, if you just at the very least mid-roll with a deck or high-roll, you're gonna have a really smooth time, so it's really, really strong and I do super recommend it. There will also be fights on the channel with this deck, including, of course, so whether it's as an opponent or as a focus, you'll get to see in the future. And I'm also planning to do one of my like first-person POV fights with this deck too, so if you want to get some of that content, you might want to consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because that's one of the perks that YouTube channel members get. So I do exclusive first-person fights where I walk you through my hand, my mulligan, and all the game plan from start to finish. So if you want some of that more in-depth content, that is available to YouTube channel members exclusively. But otherwise, if you want to support the channel, please do give this video a like, and of course subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also check out all the different socials and other stuff I do in the description below. But otherwise, this will be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.